What would you do if someone tried to take away the one place in the world that was truly yours? Not with legal authority, not with justification, but with pure arrogance, the belief that they knew better than you how you should live? I never thought it would happen to me. For nearly 50 years, I lived by my own rules, carving out a space in the world that belonged to me and me alone. But some people can't stand to see others living freely. And that's when the trouble began. I'm Jack Reynolds, a retired Army veteran who spent 2 decades serving my country. I've marched through deserts, slept in freezing rain, and faced down situations most people couldn't imagine. And through it all, one thought kept me going: someday, I'd find a quiet place to call my own, where no one could tell me what to do. That place became my parents' house, a sturdy little ranch home they left to me when they passed. I inherited it in my late 30s, back when my marriage was still intact and my kids were just finishing high school. It wasn't much to look at back then: peeling paint, a sagging roof, an overgrown yard, but I didn't care. It had good bones. And it was mine. Over the years, I poured my heart and soul into that house. Every nail I drove in, every blade of grass I cut, every repair I made was a reflection of who I was. It wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary. My fortress. I rebuilt the deck with my own hands, installed hardwood floors, fixed the plumbing, and even put on a new roof. You could walk through the place and see my handiwork in every corner. I liked it that way. It felt personal, lived in, like no one else could ever understand its worth the way I did. The house sat on a quiet street in an older neighborhood, the kind of place where people mostly kept to themselves. It was perfect for me. I wasn't the type to host barbecues or gossip with neighbors. Privacy was my top priority, and for the most part, my neighbors respected that. We'd exchange a nod while hauling trash bins to the curb, maybe a quick "morning" if we crossed paths heading out for the day. And that was it. Just the way I liked it. I'd settled into a life of quiet independence. Divorced for nearly a decade, my 2 kids grown and living in other states, I had no one to answer to and no obligations beyond keeping my home the way I wanted it. And I liked it that way. I wasn't the kind of father who expected his kids to check in every day. I'd raised them to be independent, just like me. We stayed in touch, but they had their own lives, and I had mine. The Army had drilled self-reliance into me. You didn't wait for someone else to fix your problems, you rolled up your sleeves and got it done yourself. That independence was my pride. I hated bureaucracy. I despised red tape. I had spent too many years being told what to do, where to be, and how to live. Out here, in this house, on this quiet street, I was free. No commanding officers. No deadlines. No one breathing down my neck. Just me, my tools, and the satisfaction of a job well done. I thought I had everything figured out. This house, this life, it was my escape from the noise of the world. But life has a funny way of knocking you off balance when you least expect it. I never saw it coming. I never could have imagined that my biggest battle wouldn't be on foreign soil, but right here, in my own neighborhood. It all started when they moved in. The people who couldn't stand the idea of someone like me living outside their control. The people who would do anything, lie, threaten, even destroy my home, to force me to comply. The Homeowners Association. The HOA. It started with a knock on the door, sharp and deliberate, the kind that told me whoever was on the other side wasn't just stopping by for a friendly visit. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and pulled open the door to find a woman standing there, smiling too wide, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. I'd seen her before, Susan Caldwell. Lived a few houses down. I didn't know much about her except that she was one of the newer residents, one of those types who always seemed busy with some kind of community project. "Hi there," she chirped, her tone so forced it almost made my teeth hurt. I just wanted to stop by and share something exciting we've been working on for the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She clutched the clipboard tighter, her fingers flexing over the edges. "A few of us have been organizing a homeowners association," she said, as if it was the best news I'd hear all year. "It's a great way to keep the community looking nice, maintain property values, and create a stronger sense of togetherness." I leaned against the doorframe, unimpressed. "And what exactly does that mean for me?" Susan's smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. "Oh, nothing at all. It's completely optional for current homeowners." She flipped through the pages on her clipboard, pretending to scan something. "But new buyers in the neighborhood will be required to join. Over time, we hope everyone sees the benefits and chooses to participate." "Optional, huh?" I said, folding my arms. "And what happens if I decide to pass?" Her eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe. "Nothing at all," she assured me, too quickly. "We just love to have everyone involved. It's really for the good of the community." I nodded, already stepping back inside. "Appreciate the information. But I think I'll stick to how things are." I could tell she didn't like that answer, but she forced a polite laugh and handed me a brightly colored flyer before retreating down the steps. "Improving our community together" was printed in bold letters across the top. Below it, in smaller text, were details about HOA meetings, monthly dues, and a list of community standards, including regulations about yard maintenance, fence height, and even acceptable house colors. I chuckled, tossed the flyer into the trash, and went back to work. I should have paid more attention. I should have seen the warning signs. Because a few weeks later, I got another flyer. This one was more insistent. "Join the HOA and be part of something great." It read, practically demanding participation. I ignored it. But the neighborhood was changing. Where people used to just nod politely, now they were striking up conversations, subtly pressing me about the HOA. I'd hear things like, "Hey, have you thought about signing up?" or "It'd be nice to have you at the meetings." Invitations turned into reminders. Reminders turned into warnings. Then, one day, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was an official-looking letter from the HOA, welcoming me as a new member. My stomach twisted as I read the fine print. Apparently, I had signed the membership agreement, committing to the rules and the monthly dues. I hadn't signed anything. I stormed down the street, gripping the letter so tight the paper crinkled in my hand. I found Susan standing in her front yard, chatting with a few neighbors. She looked up, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression, recognition, guilt, but she masked it quickly with another one of her artificial smiles. "You got the welcome letter," she said brightly, as if I had just been invited to a club I should be grateful to join. I held up the paper. "I never signed this." She tilted her head. "Oh, are you sure? Maybe you forgot?" I clenched my jaw. I don't forget signing legal documents. Someone forged my signature. Susan let out a breathy little laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, Jack, it must have been a clerical error. I'll check with the board, but honestly, it might just be easier for you to stay in. It's not like we're asking much, just a small contribution to the community." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Remove me. Now." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I'll look into it. But you know, the HOA has some great benefits. And over time, we really hope you see that." I turned and walked away before I did something I'd regret. But I had a bad feeling in my gut. I didn't trust her. And I sure as hell didn't trust whoever else was behind this. And I was right not to. Because that was the moment things started getting worse. The first violation notice appeared on my doorstep a week later. A crisp white envelope stamped with the HOA logo slipped under my door like some kind of ominous calling card. Notice of violation, bold, red letters across the top. My grass was too long, it claimed. My fence was in need of maintenance. My truck, parked in my own damn driveway, was deemed an eyesore. I crumpled the letter and tossed it straight into the trash. 2 days later, another notice arrived. This time, the wording was more forceful. Failure to comply may result in fines. The arrogance of it made my blood boil. I wasn't part of their damn HOA. Their rules meant nothing to me. Or at least, that's what I thought. I should have known that people like Susan and her little committee weren't the type to take no for an answer. They started slow, small things meant to annoy me, to wear me down. My trash bins mysteriously disappeared on collection day, only to be found dumped 3 streets over. My mailbox got knocked loose from its post, the screw suspiciously missing. A neighbor I barely knew suddenly felt the need to report me to the city for safety concerns regarding my fence. But then they made a mistake. They came after my daughter. Lisa had come down for the weekend with my grandson, just a short visit, nothing out of the ordinary. We sat on the porch, caught up on life, watched little Ben chase fireflies in the yard. It was one of those quiet, good moments, the kind you don't realize you'll miss until it's gone. That night, she parked her car in my driveway like she always did. I didn't give it a second thought. But Susan and her HOA lackeys sure did. The next morning, Lisa got a call that left her white-faced and shaking. Child Protective Services, an anonymous report had been filed, claiming that her child was being kept in an unsafe environment, that the house was neglected, hazardous, and unfit for a child, that there were concerns about my mental state. I didn't need a detective to tell me who was behind it. The agent showed up that afternoon, clipboard in hand, a stiff smile barely masking the suspicion in her eyes. Lisa tried to explain, but the fear in her voice told me everything. She was terrified that one wrong word could put her son at risk. We walked the agent through the house, answered her questions, let her poke around. There was nothing wrong, no hazards, no dangers, just a home that had been targeted by petty, vindictive people. CPS cleared Lisa, of course, but the damage was done. That night, she told me she wouldn't be coming back for a while, not because she didn't love me, not because she believed the accusations, but because she couldn't risk putting Ben through that again. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, my hands clenched into fists. That was the moment I decided to stop ignoring them. The next time I saw Susan at her usual morning coffee group, I walked straight up to her table. The conversation around her died as I dropped the CPS report in front of her. "Enjoying your coffee?" I asked, voice steady but cold. Susan barely glanced at the papers before letting out a light chuckle. "Oh, Jack, I really have no idea what you're talking about." I leaned in just enough for her to see the fire in my eyes. "I'm not playing your games anymore, Susan. You ever, go after my family again, and I promise you, I'll make sure you regret it." She smiled, tilting her head like I was a misbehaving child she found mildly amusing. "Oh, Jack," she said sweetly, "you're making this into such a big deal. You could make things so much easier if you just followed the rules." Rules. That word had haunted me for years. I had spent half my life following rules set by people who never had to live by them themselves. But out here? This was supposed to be my land. My life. And they had just declared war. 2 nights later, they proved it. I left for a supply run in town, gone no more than an hour. When I returned, I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into the driveway. My fence, the one they'd been harassing me about for weeks, was destroyed. Not just damaged, but ripped apart, whole sections missing, the wood splintered and scattered like a tornado had torn through. My front window was shattered, shards of glass twinkling in the moonlight. The porch light had been smashed to pieces, fragments of the bulb crunching under my boots as I stepped closer. And then I saw it, the final insult. Spray painted across the side of my house, in bold, dripping red letters asterisk. HOA rules. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there, staring at the words that burned themselves into my brain. Then, slowly, deliberately, I turned and walked to my garage. Pulled up the security footage. And there they were. 5 of them. HOA's so-called officers, led by Greg Thompson, the smug, stocky enforcer Susan had recently put in charge of compliance. They marched onto my property like they owned it, batons in hand, tearing down my fence with a sick kind of enthusiasm. One of them took a swing at my window, shattering it in a single blow. Another laughed as he spray-painted the words across my siding. They didn't even try to hide their faces. That was their mistake. I grabbed my phone, my hands steady with a cold, unwavering fury, and dialed the police. "Yeah," I said, voice sharp and controlled. "I've got 5 suspects on camera committing felony vandalism and trespassing. You might want to send a couple of units over." I sent the footage before I even hung up. Let's see how the HOA handled real authority. The police arrived faster than I expected, their flashing lights painting streaks of red and blue across my broken fence. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as the officers reviewed the security footage on my laptop. Their faces went from neutral to tight-jawed disbelief as they watched Greg Thompson and his pack of thugs destroy my property like it was some sort of game. "This is clear-cut vandalism and trespassing," one officer muttered, shaking his head. "They didn't even try to cover their faces." "No," I said, voice steady. "Because they think they're above the law." Within hours, the police had warrants issued for all 5 men in the footage. It didn't take long to track them down. They weren't criminals used to hiding, they were neighbors, smug little enforcers who had spent months bullying people into submission. But this time, they had left evidence. This time, there were consequences. I watched from my porch as Greg and his crew were led away in handcuffs, their expressions shifting from cocky to stunned. Susan Caldwell stood across the street, arms crossed, her face carefully blank, but I saw the tension in her posture. She wasn't expecting this. Good. But I wasn't done. The criminal charges were a start, but I had no intention of stopping there. These weren't just a few bad apples acting on their own. This was a pattern, a culture of intimidation that started at the top. And I was going to make sure the whole rotten tree came crashing down. I hired a lawyer, a damn good one, and we filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA itself. The goal wasn't just to recover the damages to my home. It was about exposing everything, the harassment, the forged signatures, the financial corruption hidden beneath their polished neighborhood image. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Turns out, Susan and her HOA board had been embezzling funds for years. HOA dues weren't just going toward community improvements. No, a good chunk of that money had been quietly redirected into luxury vacations, home renovations, and private expenses. My lawyer obtained emails and financial records that showed Susan had personally approved thousands of dollars in expenditures that had nothing to do with the neighborhood. I made sure those records were included in the lawsuit. When the trial began, I sat in the front row, arms folded, as the prosecutor laid out the evidence. The security footage of the vandalism played first, and the room was silent as the judge watched Greg and his crew laughing while they tore apart my property. Then came the forged membership form, the fake legal notices, the CPS report that had nearly torn my family apart. And finally, the financial documents. Susan's defense was weak from the start. She tried to distance herself from the vandalism, claiming Greg and his men had acted on their own. But the emails told a different story. In one, she had explicitly encouraged them to enforce compliance however necessary. Another showed that she had signed off on the fake violation notices meant to intimidate me. Then came the embezzlement charges. That's when the cracks really started to show. Other homeowners, once loyal supporters of the HOA, began turning on her. Some testified that they had been pressured into compliance, afraid that speaking out would make them targets like I had been. Others admitted they had suspected something was wrong with the finances but hadn't dared to ask questions. By the end of the trial, there was no doubt. The verdict came swiftly. The HOA was found guilty of harassment, trespassing, property damage, and financial fraud. The judge ordered them to pay me $300,000 in damages and dismantle their enforcement team permanently. Susan and the remaining board members were personally fined and barred from holding leadership positions in any HOA ever again. The neighborhood was in chaos. The once powerful HOA, the group that had controlled everything from fence colors to trash can placement, was now barely holding on. People who had once followed their rules without question were demanding answers, demanding refunds, demanding resignations. Susan? She was done. She resigned the next morning, her reputation in ruins. She put her house up for sale a few weeks later, but after everything that had happened, no one wanted to buy from her. The woman who had spent years dictating how other people should live was now the one being pushed out. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt triumphant, knowing that I had won. But as I stood in front of my house, looking at the repairs still left to be made, I realized something. This place didn't feel like home anymore. Not because of the damage, not because of the spray-painted words that had long since been scrubbed clean. But because of everything I had been through here. The fights, the threats, the exhaustion of always having to defend what was supposed to be mine. I had fought for my home, but now, I didn't want it anymore. It was time to move on. I listed the house for sale the next week. It felt strange at first, like I was giving up on something I had fought so hard to protect. But the truth was, the battle had changed me. This house had been my sanctuary, my retreat from the world, but now it was just a reminder of everything I'd been through. Every time I looked at the front window, I remembered the shattered glass. Every time I stepped onto the porch, I saw the spot where spray-painted letters had once declared war on my freedom. I had won, but at what cost? I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next battle would start. It was time for a fresh start. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple, eager and full of excitement, walked through the door and saw what I had once seen, a place full of potential, something they could make their own. I wished them well, signed the papers, and handed over the keys without looking back. I took the settlement money from the lawsuit and bought a small house in a quiet town, far from HOAs, far from power-hungry neighbors who thought they had the right to control how other people lived. It wasn't much, a fixer-upper on a big plot of land, but it was mine, and that was all I cared about. Life slowed down in the best way. I set up a woodworking shop in the garage, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I built furniture, small projects at first, then bigger ones. There was a peace in working with my hands again, a kind of satisfaction that had nothing to do with rules or fights or proving a point. I even took a part-time job at the local hardware store, not because I needed the money, but because I liked the steady rhythm of small-town life. People here didn't care about parking violations or fence height restrictions. They didn't send out warning letters or call the cops over trash bins left out too long. They minded their own business, the way neighbors should. I made a few friends, real ones, the kind who didn't need rules to tell them how to be decent human beings. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, drinking coffee and swapping stories, the way things used to be before people started thinking they needed an HOA to manage their lives. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. No more threats. No more battles. Just freedom. Looking back, I don't regret standing my ground. Some fights are worth having. But I learned something through it all. Sometimes, real freedom isn't just about winning. It's about choosing where to put your energy and knowing when to walk away. So tell me, have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen in disguise? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.